Hey guys, it's Nate.
Hey, it's Barry.
Hey guys, it's Brian.
Welcome back to the Collecti-Bros podcast. Today's feature is another episode of the lovely series, Is It Worth It? Topic at hand being discussed today, Die Hard Arcade for the Sega Saturn. As always, we'll go over our major categories: story, gameplay, sound, graphics, and the ultimate question, the price/collectability aspect of it. We'll start off with a little information first about the genesis/birth of this game.
Genesis, I see what you did there.
Unintentional, but I'll take the Sega puns. So this game was developed internally at Sega by STI, which is a Sega Technical Institute, and AM1, which is the research division of Sega. So it's actually the last game STI developed ever. AM1 was selected for this game because it is actually the first 3D beat-em-up ever produced. AM1 produced the first 3D graphics for Sega with Wing War, so they were chosen specifically to work on this title. The early drafts of this game was not 3D. The reason why this game was kind of thought out was they had a lot of extra arcade boards. Sega of America has just recently acquired the Die Hard license and didn't have a Die Hard game. So they put these two internal studios to work to get it done. The very interesting aspect of this game, the Japanese version does not have the Die Hard license, so it's technically a different game series.
Do you know why Japan didn't get the Die Hard license at all?
So there's a very tumultuous history of Sega Japan and Sega America, kind of just almost running two different companies simultaneously. And Sega America was looking for a hit in the arcades, and they're like, oh, Die Hard will bring people, it's an action game. Sega Japan was very slow-moving, calculated, trying to do things the right way. Sega America was like Wild Westing, just pulling triggers.
So America didn't want to share?
They wanted to stand out and impress Japan, but it always came off to Japan as grandstanding. So their relationship's very tumultuous.
No, so I mean, if you're making the same game for both regions, why did Japan say, no, we don't want the title? So, or did Japan were they not allowed to have the title?
International licensing, they would have had to do a separate deal, and they were like, we're trying to make it cheap. This was all produced for Sega of America, so they basically sent them over a non-licensed Die Hard game. So its licensing was completely different than it kind of is now. You had to get international rights to stuff too. And they didn't,
so it sounded like Japan was like, nah,
yeah, they're
not worth it.
Just trying to do the cheapest thing, which is funny because, spoiler, Japan got a full sequel. That's actually a series, which is pretty interesting. This game was obviously published by Sega, being that they developed it and had the resources at the time. It was created simultaneously for the Saturn and arcade, so Saturn was in mind with this game, and I think it really shows through the actual gameplay. This is very polished, in quotations, port, because it is a true Saturn game.
I'll give Sega all the credit in the world, especially with the Saturn. A lot of their games are as close as you can get to arcade perfect.
Yeah, they were trying to maximize the revenue of the arcade version, so they waited a year in between releasing the Saturn version, which came out in 97, while the arcade hit in 96.
So the arcade version, this is a port, correct?
Technically, yeah.
So did those companies create the arcade version, or just ported it?
They made them simultaneously.
Okay.
So, like I said, it's weird because technically it's a port, it's Die Hard Arcade, but it was developed as a Saturn game in mind while being developed as an arcade game, which is super interesting to me.
It's usually, that's backwards.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if you know or not. You can cut it if you don't know. Do you know what board they used? Because I know the later Saturn arcade boards were almost internally the same as a lot of the Saturn chips and processors and shit.
Yeah, it's STV1, I'm 98% confident.
And the Dreamcast even too, for the I can't think of whatever the Neptune, the gap between the Dreamcast and the Saturn, that Neptune, it had a bunch of arcade components in it.
It was on an STV board.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It is cool because it's we don't think about arcades nowadays, but back then it was the big, even with fighting games were huge, especially with Capcom and Sega. They wanted to get everything as arcade perfect in quotations as possible. When you port it to PlayStation, there's differences between the software and the hardware. And a lot of people swear, and I've seen it in motion, it's hard to argue against, that the Saturn is as close as you can get to arcade at home.
I mean, I was always under the impression that's what Sega did, was their consoles were the consoles for arcade
Right.
players compared to, I don't think Nintendo cared so much.
It's weird. It's like Neo Geo and Sega were the two, like that was their goal, their objective.
It feels fairly topical as Sega's just closed their recently largest arcade in Japan, their last one.
It's the times.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Sega can come out with a home console and still make arcade games.
Be sick.
One could dream, but that'd be a whole other podcast episode.
They are coming out with the Mega Drive 2, or whatever that thing's called. Mega Drive Mini.
With
2.
CD games on it.
That's cool.
Please.
Please bring it here.
Please. I want to play Popful Mail, please.
I absolutely do too. There's a lot of really just value alone great games on that. Please come to America. So this game in America is Die Hard Arcade. The interesting thing is in Japan, they did not have the Die Hard license. So it was released as Dynamite Deca in Japan.
Dynamite Deca.
Same game, different skin, barely, but this kind of explains a lot if you guys have seen Die Hard. Well, this doesn't quite feel like Die Hard.
Do you know offhand like some of the short and sweet differences? Are there any differences in it?
The building animation in this Die Hard Arcade is modeled after Nakatomi Plaza from the first movie, even though the plot does not follow that at all. And your character's name's John McClane, even though he's not modeled after Bruce Willis, because they didn't have Bruce Willis's license.
In the American one?
Yes.
So what? So the buildings are different.
The building's different. There's a few Nakatomi Plaza signs scattered throughout some of the stages.
So since there are differences, like which one was developed first? Do you know?
The American one, Die Hard.
So they took that and then they just switched it. Okay.
Just took the license out. It's so subtle. It's basically the exact same game. It is. They had the license. They didn't know what to do with it. They decided the best way to do it was to slap it on this game they were already making.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's this whole very interesting development history for this game. That's why I thought it'd be a good episode to pick. And I knew a little bit of it going in, but like doing research, I was kind of like, this is a crazy story. And it's classic 90s Sega. Like, it's all turmoil. It's all crazy.
Weird side quest subplot. I remember like as a kid, the big deal with Bruce Willis in video games was like Apocalypse for PlayStation.
Yep.
That was the first game to get his actual license because like Bruce Willis was a huge star back then. But I remember even like the ads, the cover art, the in-game model. I remember like watching E3 clips and this guy was like, oh, we have Bruce Willis's likeness in-game, and they show this shitty plug-in old Bruce Willis, and it was like this huge unveiling for them. Just weird, interesting side note.
So the Die Hard Arcade Bruce Willis doesn't look like Bruce Willis?
Correct.
But he does look like Bruce Willis.
If he was generic. So like if you look at the cover art.
Bruce Willis is generic.
Yeah. Hudson Hawk was a handsome man, though.
It's like pure.
I mean, how much can you do in 1996?
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. Yeah, but you know, people were very sensitive of I know there was a lot of other film likeness rights lawsuits. Like Universal Studios had several big lawsuits with the classic Universal monsters and their family members, people using their likenesses and stuff. So it was very topical, and people were very sensitive towards the subject of we might get sued for using a likeness. So
It's just
it's a wild concept.
Likenesses now make complete sense because graphically we can basically make the images look like pictures and film, but I'm just thinking 20 years ago, and they're somehow like, that's my likeness. Like, boy, that's a blob with the colored hair on
But
top.
back then, remember, we were like, oh, dude, graphics are never going to get
Cutting
better than
edge.
this.
The cutting edge, yeah.
Also keep in mind, think of it from the box art and advertising aspect. It's way easier to draw someone's likeness with a pencil.
Oh, is the box art included in that?
Yeah, if you look at the box art for Die Arcade, it does not look exactly like Bruce Willis. It looks like Jim from accounting. So
That doesn't look like Bruce Willis.
No, it doesn't look like Bruce Willis at all.
yeah, it looks like Henry Rollins.
Wait, is he blonde in the game? And he's got dark hair on the
Like
cover?
dirty blonde in it, yeah.
It's because it's Bruno in Japan. Which we'll catch on that later. But
Okay.
Bruno is more of a character than we realized.
Okay. All right, we'll save that for the story, I guess. Seems like some story content.
This will be the briefest topic we cover, story. The story is really complex and layered. Terrorists have the president's daughter. You gotta go get her and defeat the terrorist.
That was my favorite part in the movie.
Obviously not the same story as the movie.
I think it's an interesting parallel that the movie is like not your typical action movie, right? There's like some depth to it. There's like romance. He's not your typical action star where he's just like gunning everybody down with his shirt off. Like he's very vulnerable throughout the whole movie. The body count's not like astronomically high. I get they probably just, we did cover it. They just slapped the license on there to sell it, but the parallel between the difference in the story for this and the movie is pretty interesting to me.
This is obviously a cash grab.
Yeah, they had the license. They didn't know what to do with it.
They had the license. They're making an arcade game. What's popular? Die Hard. Okay, let's do it.
Flex tape the Die Hard name on this game.
Is it Flex Tape or Flex Seal?
Flex Seal's the spray. Flex Tape's the one he slaps the... You get the meme where it's like...
With the tank that's shooting water out?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the Die Hard movies, fondly remembered, Alan Rickman, one of his greatest roles is Hans Gruber. That's not who you're up against in this game. Wolf Hong is the terrorist cell leader in this game, and he has a very colorful cast of minions to send after you and your partner if you're playing co-op, Chris Thompson, if anyone remembers her from any of the Die Hard movies.
Again, yeah, she was great in movies.
Yes. There's no mention of Chris Thompson in the game or movies at all, so they just took
the president and her daughter's not in the movie.
They just took the Dynamite Dooku chick and stuck her on there in co-op. So obviously, Die Hard license, you're John McClane as your player 1. In the Japanese version, you're Bruno Dillinger.
Who thought of that name?
Sega. There's not a lot to cover for the story because it's an arcade game in mind and it's a beat 'em up. Beat 'em ups aren't exactly known for their greatest story. They tried to do a cute little things with the cinematics for this. Like there is a guy in the background trying to break into safe in the same office that Wolf is chilling in. So like kind of parallel the movie when they're opening the safe, but they never specifically talk about why they're opening the safe in any of the cinematics or what their actual objective of taking this building over is. So that's the story.
I mean, even if you add in the NPCs and the characters, you got a football player boss.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I don't, and then like some of them, when they pop out the doors, they looked like cops, but I couldn't tell if they were actually cops.
The guys with wearing towels.
Sumo wrestlers, like street kids, the disco lady.
This gang has clearly infiltrated everyone in society
weird.
at some level.
So one of the very charming things about this game is, I was going to kind of go into that with gameplay.
That it makes no sense.
That it's just wild. It is so wild. Like I think we all had grins on our face playing like, what? Oh, I'm fighting a robot now. Sweet. Oh, now it's a ninja.
Oh yeah, there were two robots that came out of the ceiling. I think it was this. It was.
This fountain's attacking me. Now I'm fighting firemen.
Yeah, I just didn't know what I was going to fight next. It was almost like they had a development team and was like, all right, you're going to go take this level, do whatever you want with it. All right, you got level 2. Put whatever you want on that floor. Was there an aquarium?
Oh, yeah.
There was an aquarium.
You're fighting a football guy.
Well, yeah, you were fighting him in the room that had a giant like wall aquarium.
BFF.
And I'm just like, where'd this aquarium come out in the skyscraper? I don't know. This is odd.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing with an arcade beat 'em up. It's like they didn't really care about story, so they got very creative and colorful with your enemy types. Yeah.
Their depth of background.
So there was really like a Wild West basically of stringing this story along because I think Barry kind of hit on the head, like do what you want, and they Frankenstein it together, which made a fantastic journey. So moving on to gameplay, I think this is obviously the standout feature of this game. I'm a beat 'em up enthusiast. I just enjoy the genre, good, bad, everything in between. This one specifically, I think I'm always going to prefer 2D beat 'em ups over 3D ones. This obviously being the first 3D beat 'em up, you would expect it to age pretty poorly. I think it plays fantastic.
Yeah, I'll second that. It's definitely, as far as 3D beat 'em ups go, it's the best, if not, top tier for sure. And a lot of the times when you have traditional 2D games transfer to 3D, they're usually not great. So it's interesting that they kept some of the gameplay elements from a beat 'em up, like having different planes that you can fight on. I think that's what complements this super well. Like if you have the other 3, like Fighting Force as an example, just because it's one I spent a ton of time with. I remember if you're trying to go up, walk up towards, technically away from the screen, right? This, it's literally like you push up and it's like you're on a different plane. So it does feel like a 2D fighter. Like, yeah, you might miss the hitbox. I do think the hitboxes were fair on this, but it's not like, you know, a 360-degree angle. So there's no like cheap spots where you're going to miss it. They're going to hit you. And even with the weapons, it's not just your fists or your kicks. So it's interesting that it plays so similar to something that you already know. So at the time, I'm sure it was like, oh, this looks amazing, but it feels familiar enough. It's fun enough. Yeah, they did a great job of transitioning that, because there's been so many other times that I'm sure everyone here can think of numerous examples where a traditional 2D game goes to 3D and it's horrible. Castlevania on the 64, cough, cough.
So you're not super into beat 'em ups, right?
No, beat 'em ups aren't my jam. Considering this was the first 3D one, I was actually pleasantly surprised and impressed almost. I mean, it's your typical up, down, left, right. It's on a four directional plane, and I could have easily saw them. Oh, Saturn didn't have an analog stick, did it? It had a D-pad.
The 3D controller. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so they wouldn't have developed for the 3D controller. But I mean, you could have taken, some games do it, but you could have taken a 4-directional D-pad and turned it into an 8-directional with diagonals. And I expected that, and there was no option to shoot diagonally. The only thing that was kind of annoying is there was a couple of the enemies that had the option to lay on the ground, and they got to roll around and shoot low, and you couldn't hit them, and we didn't have the option to do the same. So you kind of had to wait till they stood back up. So that it's like they gave them another level on top of, like, this isn't just a beat 'em up. Like, now there's something within that space. So there's like a crouch, but we didn't get a crouch. Like, that was a bit of a loss, but
yeah. The only, sorry, Nate, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, the only way I got to hit those guys, and I'm not a virtual fighter pro by any means, the stretch of the imagination. There's certain moves and stuff that they copied and pasted from Virtual Fighter series, and you could do like a ground pound, like jumping air fist strike. I'm sure that's the proper term for it. But that's the only time you could ever hit these guys. But even then, you hit them once with that, and they're still prone.
Yeah, I found it surprising that it gave you jump options, but no crouch options.
Right.
Like, even if someone was doing some, like in a normal fighting game, like Mortal Kombat's got it. I mean, we've got it out here on the Super Nintendo and 8-bit and 16-bit platforms. Like, you can crouch and you can jump. And if someone's kicking high, you can crouch low and miss. Or if someone's shooting a gun up high, you can crouch and miss. But we didn't get crouch. We got jump. And then we got jump into like a punch, a superhero punch into the ground, but no crouch.
Right.
It was so weird. So odd.
Yeah, the combat, definitely, Brian brought up some Virtua Fighter. I recognized, like, move for move, some of Yuki's moves from Virtua Fighter. So I found that pretty interesting when you're doing your combos. And the imperative thing with keeping an interest in a beat 'em up is, because they're simple in nature, your combat has to be semi-complex. And I found this game fairly refreshing. The combat system combo-based, and it played like Virtua Fighter, so it was kind of engaging. If you're playing co-op, you can do tag team moves, and they're brutal. They're wild. You can throw people into each other. Barry got knocked out by a tilt-a-whirl.
The football, I was laying on the ground with like a sliver of health left, and just to, smudge some dirt into that wound, he picked me up by the leg and spun me around the head and threw me into the wall, and I died. It was rough.
Unlike the prone attack, you can actually do that same move where you can pick up people and throw them into other people. So it's as annoying as it is to happen to you, you can realize you can still do that to people too, and it's pretty fun. Go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
I was going to say, yeah, I'm like I said earlier, I'm definitely not a professional Virtual Fighter player. So when you do pull off like the special moves, it's pretty rewarding. I remember I had like almost an angle slam on somebody. I was like, whoa, did you see that? Like, super rewarding when you pull those off.
How many buttons are on the controller other than the D-pad?
Say it's a 6-button layout.
It's a 6-button layout.
And the bumpers, right? Yeah.
The weapons were very fun, and there was a really, really good variety of them. Not only just projectile, but melee-based ones. Problem is there was only one button to pick them up, and it was the same punch. So I don't know if that was an arcade, because I think the arcade had 3 buttons on it. It had a punch, a jump, and a kick. There was no fourth button for like an interaction, and I think that's probably where it originated. But the punch button was also the same button to pick up weapons. So if you've backed a guy up into a corner and he's dropped his gun under him, you can't punch him. You just keep picking the gun up. So you have to like pick the gun up and back up. And the weapon variety was really fun when enemies would come out and, oh, here comes a guy with a machine gun. You punch him and you can pick it up. Problem is there was too much. Way too many of them sometimes. It would be like a pile of just little pistols. And you know, they would drop health like little capsules, but it would drop in the pile of guns, and they would be going in there screaming, pick up the pick up the health. And he's like cycling through like 6 guns before he can get to the health. And I'm like, this is lasting a little bit too long. The weapons were extremely fun. Like picking up the stick, or I think it was like a broom, and you could break it. And, that was so broke. The range was so long on it. Super fun that things would just pop up and turn them into weapons instead of just enemies coming out to drop them. But you could use things in the environment as weapons. There's just too much of it in a small area.
It's kind of the charming part about this game too, that it's so crazy and over the top. Like, you can shoot someone with a pistol, or you could bash them in the head with a grandfather clock randomly, because
yeah, somebody picked up a clock. I do remember that.
Yep.
There's pepper shakers and missile launchers.
I like the pepper. The pepper was good.
So varied.
The hairspray with the lighter.
Yeah, the hairspray with the lighter.
Yeah.
That was one.
And they're like kind of based on like the screen, so the missile launchers aren't going to randomly pop up throughout the game. They're very much for that stage, that screen. Mm-hmm. So like, you know, you're going to get one. This the first boss you fight is a big, I guess he's a biker, and you can like strategically try to save the guy with the missile launcher last to pick it up and use it against the boss. But then you have to dodge him shooting missiles at you. There's 3-4 other guys trying to beat you up. But the weapon variety is absolutely a standout in this game.
I think it's to cover what you said a little bit. It's important to note that this isn't traditional like a beat 'em up where you keep going right and keep going right and keep going right until you reach the end of the screen. Mm-hmm. This is broken up by stages where it's going to throw you in, maybe play a quick little cinematic, maybe play a quick time event, which we can get into in a little bit. And then it throws you into almost like a room, right? Where you have to fight out of the room, and then it throws you into the next one. You're not actively scrolling across the screen.
It was almost kind of like a beat 'em up fighting game hybrid, where it's a stage and everyone has a specific backdrop and environment that you're in, and then the next stage as you go through the story, it's different, but you still have this 3D environment to traverse and beat up dudes in certain areas and pick up weapons in certain areas. I mean, I don't think there was any stages where you could fall off at all, because it's all contained inside of a building, but it did kind of feel like a hybrid fighting game, but also it didn't lose the ability to also feel like a beat 'em up. Like, it was big enough to feel like a beat 'em up and small enough to not just keep, all right, we just go to the next screen, we'll have to fight that guy, go to the next screen, I'll have to fight that guy.
This game's just very unique for the genre, and it being the first 3D one, they took very creative directions with it that stand out, and it kind of still plays great today. And then we already touched on it, the breaking up between stages. You get a quick time event, like it is either a combat based one or an evasion based one, and you would either jump, punch, or kick based on what the screen tells you. If you fail it for the combat ones, you have to fight the guy from that screen, so it's kind of like an extended game. If you screw them all up, you get to fight more. And you take a massive health loss if you don't do the evasion ones properly. And
yeah, I think one we got hit by a car.
Before we move on from weapons completely, I want to give a special shout out to the anti-tank rifle. It was pretty fun to use. Yeah.
It was fun to bundle up guys together and just be like, all right, get out of the way. And we turned the friendly fire off, so we were just like letting them get back up, blasting them, letting them get back up. Just be like, hey, sorry, Barry or Nate, whoever I was playing with.
My body would just be flopping up and down with the enemies, but I'm like, just do what you got to do until I can get back up. It wouldn't give me enough time to recover and move. You just kept going. I was like, okay, that's fine.
One footnote we had playing this game for modern players, if you guys plan on playing this, is I have a smart TV. We were playing this on a Sega Saturn with a retro Tink, right? Mm-hmm. Playing with a retro Tink on a modern smart TV. For some reason, between these loading screens and these QuickTime events, my TV would think of switching inputs. So we were sitting here panicking.
No, it wasn't registering there was an input. So the power is odd, and I'm not sure if it's a Sega Saturn thing, because I don't have this issue on my TV. I'm wondering if that's how the Saturn is set up. But when you have something happening as a video input and it cuts over to a cutscene, the screen will turn black, and I'm assuming the system is registering that as no video output. And so the TV is thinking no video input. Wait, it'll try and refresh the input. I think that's what was happening. So it would sit there and try and refresh the input because it thought there was no power coming into an input, and then we would lose our 2-second cutscene because Nate's TV was trying to load and be like, oh God, where'd the video go? Oh God.
And specifically, I think this is a my TV problem because even if I'm using my PS4 or Xbox on that TV, if I switch from a game to Netflix, it does the same thing. So
it registers it as
it'll go like a black
no
screen
input.
for a minute, and then it'll come back like out of game mode into video mode or whatever.
And we did look to, maybe we just didn't spend enough time into it, but we tried to look into the settings to see if there was a way to turn that off. So that might be if you decide to try and play this on your, newer TV.
I thankfully have a plethora of tube TVs.
We probably should have just switched over.
Yeah, and that's
I wanted to see what it looked like on a retro tank, though.
No, absolutely, same. And like this, that's it. We'll get into the topic with graphics here soon, but this game does look pretty nice. So this game is essentially the same as the arcade version. However, how you can't stick quarters into a Sega Saturn. So they came up with a unique solution, and Barry and Brian had a blast with that solution because I kept getting handed the controller. We were trying to get continues.
Yep.
Barry, you want to go over
good
that?
At it. I'm not good at it. It's called Deep Sea, right? Deep Sea Sub?
Deep Scan.
Deep Scan? What was that originally on?
Arcade.
Arcade only?
An arcade cabinet from this.
Did it ever report that to a console at all, like the Genesis?
No.
Okay.
It was Atari-esque. That shit was fucking...
It was like very old.
That's
old
true, yeah.
Arcade. I will go confirm that really quick.
This is the only way to play Deep Scan on a home console.
Came out in Atari 2600.
Oh shit! Yeah, damn.
Is that it? Just Atari 2600 then?
Yep.
Okay.
Wow.
It was published under Subscan for the Atari 2600, so it's probably pretty different.
But does it play exactly the same?
I bet it's somewhere because
it's very
similar, very.
Yeah.
Okay. So to get more lives in this game, you could play Deep Scan, which you're a battleship and you're dropping bombs to try and hit submarines floating under you, but the submarines are shooting little fireballs or whatever they were, missiles at you up top. So unless you want to play Subscan on the Atari, this is the only other way to play Deep Scan on a console on Die Hard Arcade. And depending on how many lives or how many points you get, you gain like credits. So that was their solution to, hey, you can't put more quarters in, but you guys can sit here and play Deep Scan for as long as you want to and rack up the tokens and then go into the game and have that amount of them. So how long? Brian and I tried it. I just couldn't. The thing is like that missile would come up and it would be a single pixel.
That hitbox was ridiculous.
It was horrible.
I was like, I don't have time for this.
So
Nate here.
the boat is inside the water and then it'll curve up like the front and the back of a battleship does. So is it the stern and the bow? Is that what it's called? I don't know boats. But anyways, I'll say the bow. The bow would be sticking out of the water. Wouldn't even be touching the water. I don't even know if these missiles are can shoot out of. I'm going to assume they shoot out of the water in the lore of Deep Scan. Okay, right? It's a tiny little white pixel that flashes 1 pixel to 4 pixels to 1 pixel to 4 pixels, and it's shooting up, and you have to dodge it. It's almost like I don't know why. Oh, I'm thinking of Galaga, where you can spin your ship around.
Like asteroids.
Oh, maybe that's what it is.
That's what you're thinking.
Y'all, I am not educated on arcade games at all.
Especially this era. This isn't exactly your...
I just know as a kid, my dentist office had an arcade that was a flat top, and the TV was in the middle, and you could play... it was a 2-player, and you could sit there and play the one where you were a triangle ship, and you could spin around and shoot... Is it asteroids?
Asteroids.
All right, we had a flat top sit-down asteroids cabinet,
Awesome.
and that's
very
about...
cool.
That was my dentist's office. I don't even know if they still have it, but that's my knowledge of arcades. Moving on. So you would have to move left and right to dodge these missiles, and even if the missile didn't touch the bottom of the ship, if it touched even a pixel inside of the bow of the ship, you're done. You're dead. So, maybe in this Deep Scan lore, the missiles can shoot outside of the water, but it didn't show no animation and we would get mad. So we made Nate play it for credits because he was the superior one at it.
I think it's interesting too. Even after you like die, you get your game over. It still lets you grind and keep your Die Hard quarters, right? So like our strategy was, I think the first time we did it, we were like, let's see how far we get in Die Hard without playing Subscan or whatever it was called. And then we did it again with like 10, I think.
It only gives you 5 or 6 to start out with.
Yes.
Something like that.
5.
Right. Yeah. And then eventually we were like, Nate, screw it. Get us 25. I kept messing with him. I was like, Nate, get us 15. Nate, get us 20. Nate, get us 25. And you got pretty good at it, man.
And I enjoy 70s. This was 79, I believe, when Deep's game came out to the arcade. So it's very primitive. Think Space Invaders primitive. This is Atari. Came out on 83 for the Atari.
It had black, white, and blue, and I think that's about the color scheme.
And that red ship.
I have an appreciation.
Was it red?
I think it was like bright red, wasn't it?
It was weird because the bottom of it, I think the bottom was red and the top was white.
Yeah, it was
so
ugly.
It just looked like a cargo carrier.
It was ugly.
It wasn't even a battleship. All right, whatever.
Just fighting off pirates trying to get your
bro.
load.
Okay, fair enough.
Let's just make lore for this game.
We've got a pirate cargo ship that can drop nukes, I guess. Somehow, just an infinite amount, because we can have 3 at a time, and as soon as one blows up, you automatically reload to get the next one.
I had a oddly enjoyable time with it. I have appreciation for the very old arcade games and stuff. I could, however, see if I just purchased for full retail price Die Hard Arcade, I want to get some extra credits because I got my friends over to play co-op, and we got to sit here and play Deep Scan for 30 minutes to get credits. How that could be a little annoying to some people.
And that's why you did it.
I'll take that. And I want to confirm this really quick, but I think I remember the Japanese version had a different game on it.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I was half
It's called Deep Space.
The final stage in this game, if you have extra lives remaining, Sega was kind enough to not just take your quarters or your deep scan kills. You had to fight player 2 if you had extra lives.
Now, could you do that if you played solo? So if you played co-op, you could fight your friend.
Correct. It's just like Double Dragon, if you guys have ever played that, which is generally regarded as the greatest beat 'em up of all time.
At least for that, like story-wise, you have something to fight over. You have the girl to fight over. This, it's just like, hey, I know we just, took down this terrorist cell.
The president's daughter looked like she was 8.
You're fighting for the admiration.
Get outta here.
That's what I'm saying.
The president's daughter.
I'm talking about for Double Dragon, not for this game.
Oh.
Yeah, no.
Oh, I was like, Brian.
No.
Double Dragon.
Double Dragon.
Yeah, you had a reason to fight in Double Dragon.
Okay.
And this, it's just like, I know we took down this terrorist cell, but like, you want to duke it out now? Like,
the funny part was like, you're on the roof. I think there's a helicopter flying around, a police helicopter, and you guys are like fighting, and just these random weapons are coming out of nowhere. And the girls in the middle just like standing there, jumping up and down, cheering. And I'm like,
me, kick his ass.
Yeah.
She's choosing her champion.
Yeah.
It's like, this is the one I'm going to tell the press that saved me. So you guys have to duke it out, which is also crazy. It's like, I don't know, it's so funny. The game's so wild. It's like, beat up your partner you just went through hell to go save this little girl.
That's what I'm saying.
It's like, she's like, thank you for saving me. Now kick each other's ass. Let's go.
So we actually had an insanely amount of fun time fighting each other, and Brian was like the eternal champion of the world in versus mode.
Of all games that I'm blessed with being good at, it had to be Die Hard Arcade co-op fighting, huh?
We even thought that Chris had like a speed advantage over John, so we swapped controllers.
Tested it, yeah.
He still just smacked us. Like he was doing ground and pound moves we didn't see the whole time playing as enemies. While I'm over covering Brian's ass, and all of a sudden he's flipping me over, rolling me on the ground, like Tito Ortiz style elbows to the face. It was great.
It's a blessing and a curse. What can I say?
I think it would have been really cool if they would have kept like a versus mode as an option in this game because it was really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if anybody is curious on if player 2 or player 1 has stat differences, no. We gave the controller to Brian to test both, and he's just still annihilated both of us with both characters. So one is not faster than the other. Don't let your friends say that to you. We tried. We failed. We failed the test. We just suck.
I've always thought the enemies well, but when it came to the humans, Brian just had a like taste for blood, and it just took us out.
I don't know, man. Like I said.
It's that pole, dude.
Yep.
The pole you were just whipping around your head.
Yeah, that spinning,
couldn't even get inside.
Combo.
Yeah, you were just, let me time it up for as soon as you stand back up.
Coyote
So I
ugly
can't
combo.
even.
That thing just wrecks.
It was rough. My pride was gone.
The only difference between the arcade and Saturn version as far as gameplay is Saturn has an options menu, and you can turn blood on.
Was it violence or blood?
Well, it was called violence, but it's just
okay, that's
blood.
what it was.
It made like a blood effect, which was pretty minor. It wasn't like this game was bloody mess.
Yeah, for shooting people and using weapons that would dismember, it's not that violent. I think it is rated mature, right?
Yes. And then you could also turn friendly fire off in the home version.
Is it mature or MA13?
Yeah, it'd be MA13 probably because it wasn't around yet, right?
When was it released? 96?
6.
Close premature.
It's teen.
Oh.
Oh, well, we were wrong.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Maybe it's because it had the option to.
Yeah.
I don't know how ESRB ratings and criteria works, but
We gotta think Sega was also fairly recently in court for violence and all that, so there's probably a conscious decision like, let's aim for a teen rating
day
here.
and age, huh?
Yeah. All right, moving on to sound. Anything stand out to you, Barry?
It's been a hot minute since we played it, which is like a week ago.
I will share
Slept since then.
with you my thoughts, and you can steal whatever you want, or you can kind of maybe.
Yeah, you go first. It gives me something to bounce
I
off.
don't want to
of.
take. It's kind of everything. It's not a whole lot of sound going on in this game, but I was gonna say basically nothing's bad, but nothing really stands out. Like the crunch, I thought the crunching was really satisfying. From like the whoosh, whoosh. Like I thought it was super satisfying. I thought the gun sounded heavy, and the audio was good overall. But I thought everyone sounded like they were underwater playing Deep Scan, like when
As
they
far as
talk.
voices
Yeah,
go?
I know you guys didn't get to see the cinematics really because like the audio, but if you watch them on YouTube or whatever, it's very like. So I was going to basically say I think they did a good job with the actual sound effects. The music was so quiet, it was hard to hear, but it wasn't bad. It just wasn't stand out.
Yeah, now that you say that, like I don't remember the music very well.
It was pretty
At
mad.
all.
I remember the chopper at the beginning.
Yeah, the
like, that had some
chopper.
That's a
meat
pretty
to
good
it.
song.
Definitely the sound effects were the highlight of the sound. I thought the sound quality of the Sega Saturn, that game. I don't know other games on that console as very well to compare it to, but for that game, I thought the sound sounded very clean and crisp. It didn't sound like they tried to throw like a Nintendo bit. Sounded choppy and almost. What am I trying to say? How do you like? I don't know how to explain.
Like it's like they layered on sound. It sounded like of.
I don't know how to explain what, like when you hear
Like
a
chip
sound, like the difference between a Nintendo and a Super Nintendo. If they played the same exact song, you could tell which one's which.
Right.
Don't know how to explain that.
Yeah.
Like what that sounds like. They didn't for Sega's first CD console. It didn't feel like they were just using cartridge style sounds on it. At the same time, it didn't sound like it could use the full power of what you could do with a CD. So it was in that weird middle ground where it wasn't awful, but it wasn't dated. So it felt appropriate for the game, but maybe a little bit behind for what they could have done. But at the same time, like, you've got the PlayStation 1 to compete against, and you're probably not getting as much funding as Sony is to do things. So, I mean, all that considered, I thought it sounded appropriate. It didn't sound old. It didn't sound dated for what it was and when it came out.
I think the best way to describe the sound design and execution of this game would be not bad, but nothing quite stands out.
Yeah, I don't remember necessarily any of the music being like absolute bangers, but a lot of the sound effects, the kicking, the punching, like super satisfying with like a good loud smack or a crunch. A lot of the weapons, I mean, they were pretty generic. I remember like the assault rifle was kind of a burst, but it didn't sound like, oh, I'm about to mess some people up with this. Other than when you got a big gun, those were very rewarding with the sound.
Yeah, it didn't sound hollow or tinny.
Right.
I think
At
they
all.
sounded pretty heavy. Even the pistol had a little bit of like a thud to it. And it felt the same emotion you get when you pick it up and you're using it. Like, yeah, die! Like, I feel like the sound matched that like intensity pretty well for...
Do you know if the sound was on a stereo or a mono track? I'm going to assume it was
Assuming
a
stereo
track.
because the arcade with the two speakers,
Okay.
right? You would think. God, hopefully. I will say this too, the chopper at the beginning for like the insert your coin screen, it had a lot of like good like thud bass to it. Like it was impressive. It was a good way to like, you know, if you're walking through the arcade, it'd catch your attention because the cabinet sure won it.
Yeah, I think the opening cinematic sounds great. I think one of my criticisms with the sound of this game is the dialogue. It sounds muffled. The first audio you hear from dialogue is on a police radio, so it sounds like that already, and it's a good job of kind of masking that. You see a couple of cinematics with Wolf where he's questioning where the president's daughter's at. It sounds like he's underwater stuck in deep scan. Very, like,
I mean,
muffled.
there was a very select few games on cartridge that had voice acting, but so, I mean, voice acting wasn't really a big thing quite yet. I don't feel like.
Right.
And even if it was implemented, it wasn't great, and it cost a lot of money to do, so that's why a lot of games didn't do it. So, I mean, considering the amount of dialogue lines this game had, they probably didn't have a problem with being like, just try and do something. That's probably the best they could come up with.
Yeah, we're talking about a beat 'em up here at the end of the day, so it's not like they needed this long list of dialogue to move the narrative forward. I thought overall the audio did sound pretty crisp, though, other than that dialogue, but it sounds very of the times. I personally really thought like the Wu-Tang Kung Fu style, like whoosh, whoosh, was very satisfying, and it
when the actual sound effects are happening when you were playing it, it wasn't off-putting. It made you get into it more.
And with the beat 'em up specifically, it's really easy to hear the same. Like, as much as I love Golden Axe, it's one of my favorite games ever. Like, it's the same damn noise the entire time you're playing. This, I don't feel like it was distracting.
Did any of the enemies make noises when you hit them?
Yeah, they had some grunts that were like almost robotic, muffled, like. Urgh.
Okay, I couldn't remember if they had
that's
some or
the thing.
not.
The mixing is a little weird in this game, where the crunching and the beating 'em up sounds so loud, you don't really hear the music. You don't really hear them talking or getting the fainting noises. The music's forgettable, but I think that's also added to the effect of you really can't hear it, because you can kind of hear there's music playing in the background, but you're so focused on the whoosh, 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 that the music's going to kind of be second nature. I'll
say this too, to kind of go off what you were saying with how the sounds don't repeat themselves. I think that is because of the weapon variety. Like, you don't hear, it's a short game, right? But you don't get a ton of the same repeated sounds over, because there is such a good variety of weapons.
That, and even with the punching and kicking, it's combo based.
Right.
So you're setting that cadence, I guess we'll call it, of that. Yeah. Whereas, traditional older beat 'em ups, you really have one attack speed. This, you get a little bit of variety. And another thing why it won't add to the redundancy of it is the length of the game itself, which is the biggest criticism everyone's going to have of this game once we arrive to that point.
No, I think it was one of you two mentioned the combos weren't the same sound for each punch, and I thought that was interesting. I didn't remember it until you brought it up, and I was like, oh, like the 1, 2, 3, it was a 1, 2, 3 sound. Like, each punch had a different sound, and because there are a lot of fighting games, especially, and beat 'em up, so we're just like, psh, 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 psh. That's your combo. But this one had variety in combo sound, so it's a tiny little thing that they didn't have to do, but someone was conscious enough to be like, hey, we should probably give some variation on the combo punch. All right. Well, I don't know about you two, but the weakest part of this was the length, especially when we get to the end of the game. I think you timed it. Was it about 20 minutes?
19 minutes and 25 seconds when we completed our game.
Yeah, so our in-game time was like 19, 20, and I was like, we'll add maybe like 10 to 15 minutes onto that to play Deep Scan. Because like we damn near played Deep Scan longer than the actual game. Wow. So like 30 minutes got us from the front to the end.
I'll say this too. So after our game was over, where we beat the crap out of each other, the actual in-game timer said 19 minutes. Yeah. I don't think that was including going through our lives in combat.
No, it wasn't.
I feel like that was about maybe 10, 15 minutes also.
Or almost as long as they actually played the game. I think I didn't even realize.
Wait, so you're saying once you pop one of those credits, it resets that time?
No, it's once you defeat the boss and it's you guys fighting, your timer's not going. It's just that's your locked in time for clearing the game.
Oh, it doesn't include cutscenes and all that?
So the crazy realization I just had, because I didn't realize it until you said it, I think with Deep Scan and that combined versus mode, we probably played that more than we actually played the game, which is kind of wild.
Yeah, well, we had so many credits left over at the end that, like, I think it was like 6 or 7, so we went through the versus mode quite a bit.
Yeah. We had 11 lives when we started on versus.
11?
Yes.
Man, we got good.
The damn robots is what kept killing us.
Deep Scan.
Well, you could cheese them. Once we learned how to cheese them, that was cake.
Yep.
Yeah, I definitely think we're all going to universally agree. And if you do any research in this game, you'll see most people will say the biggest flaw of this game is absolutely the length. It's brief even by arcade standards. I can't imagine buying my new Saturn, paying full price for this game, and it being this length. As much as I love this game, I truly do really like. I picked this game for a reason. I really thoroughly enjoy this game, but man, it is so short. moving on to graphics. Brian, you want to talk about the graphics a little bit? I think it's a kind of an important feature to feature on this. I think it's kind of an important topic to go over this game, with it being the significance of it being the first 3D beat 'em up.
Yeah, I mean, they did a good job for what it is. Interesting note, we touched on it a little bit. So the animations, like we said earlier, were all ripped from Virtua Fighter. But Virtua Fighter, if you remember, like everything's so polygonal, like you can literally count the diamonds on the characters. I think they did a good job with this, with using those animations and not having the characters be overly polygonal, but they're not super detailed either. I mean, like, it doesn't look horrible. It doesn't look great. It looks good for what it is. I don't know if it's a weird, like, false memory I have, but I remember, like, playing this on the arcade and the frame rate being higher than it was on the Saturn, but we've already said that this is almost a 1-for-1 conversion, so even like the intro insert your quarter screen, like that frame rate is faster than the actual game. But as far as how everything looks, I mean, everything looks fine. I don't think everything looks like, it's not going to put your jaw on the floor, but it's serviceable. It's a clean presentation for the first game of its type, being the 3D beat 'em up. They did a great job with that. You can tell what all the guns are on the ground. You can tell what all the weapons are, except for the pepper shaker, I think, because that's just so wild and different. But all the pickups are easily distinguishable. You can always tell, like, your character and your co-op character versus the enemies on the screen. There's a good variety of enemies, and I think that's interesting too. Yeah, they are crazy. Yeah, they are different. Yeah, they are wild. But, I mean, you can tell what everything is. Like, you can tell why there's this football player, why there's a fireman, why is there a guy wearing a towel. So, serviceable.
So, Barry is a big PlayStation fan. I'm curious to get your thoughts on kind of, this is the PlayStation's competitor in quotations with the Saturn. What were kind of your thoughts on the graphic style?
I think I've only seen maybe 2 or 3 games on the Saturn, so I can't really say much for that. As far as graphically, we played it on a retro tank, so I really wanted to see what it looked like, because I think everybody knows what that probably would have looked like if you had a flat screen TV that had red, white, and yellow. It would have looked hazy and fuzzy and rough. If you got close to the TV, you can definitely see some blur, but like the further you sat back, like it looked really good. Not sure if that's credit to the retro tank upscaling. So I do wish we kind of did rush that day a little bit on playing it all together. I do wish we would have spent the time to pull out a tube and see what it looked like on a
CRTV.
CRTV, yes. I just call them tube TVs, and then I'm like, what are they actually called? I forgot. It's, TV slang over here. But that's the one thing I did wish we would have done, to see like what it would have originally looked like. But as far as like if you want to play it in a new format, you don't have a CRT TV, like it looked good with an upscaler. So as long as you don't have a trash upscaler, I'm sorry. Don't buy the trash ones.
Yeah, definitely get your money's worth where you spend it. I'll take the L on that one. I really wanted to see what it looked like on this retro tanks. I hadn't seen a Saturn running on it yet, and everything else we've played on it looks beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it looked really good. Don't get me wrong. As long as you weren't like a foot away from the TV, which, I mean, that's what we're used to as those types of games as kids, is like we sat really close to the TVs because, they're only like 20 inches wide.
The big screens were like 32. Those were like the big TVs.
The controller cords weren't long.
Yeah. Like, and you knew like you had a rich neighbor when you saw those big old giant flat screens with the huge booty behind them, and it was like, I got a 42-inch flat screen, and we're like, oh my god. At the equivalent, I think the distance for how big, because it was a 65?
65, yeah.
So at the distance we sat from the 65, I think it would have been the equivalent. Obviously, I didn't use any of the filters. I don't think you can filter on the progressive, because they have filters, especially with the retro consoles, where you can put on scan lines and stuff like that, like to emulate a CRT TV, but it didn't do anything like that. Almost didn't even get the video to come up. I don't know how we got it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the graphics design in this game. I think we touched on it earlier with how the environments were so varied. I thought the enemies were extremely varied too. And this game is very colorful. When you're playing a beat 'em up, your whole point of making a good beat 'em up is to avoid redundancy. I feel like this game does a great job with that. In a small package, unfortunately, being like a 30-minute play time, I thought all the enemies are varied. It feels like every stage actually feels like a different stage, and that's due to the graphic design in this game, which when you take on this as their first attempt at a 3D beat 'em up, it's very impressive that it actually looks the way it does. I was pretty high on the graphics overall, and execution and design.
I mean, all things considered, especially like that point, It's the first 3D side scroller. It is on a CD platform that probably didn't get as much support as the PlayStation did. It came out in 1996. Trying to put yourselves back in those shoes in that time period to see like what these graphics would have been like they're very impressive for this game. And with an upscaler, I feel like they hold up pretty well. Of course, it's not going to be like, modern gaming and you throw, I don't know, like an 11-year-old kid and be like, what do you think of the graphics in this game? They're probably going to trash on it because they don't have that experience of growing up with polygons. But if you put it in that mindset of when it came out, the graphics are very impressive. They hold up very well in an upscaler in the same sense.
I was also going to say, so I have played the arcade version before, and I feel like I have this false memory of the arcade version like running at a higher frame rate, but it's not comparatively to the arcade version. Like this is almost flawlessly. I mean, there's no difference I could tell that I remember.
I remember you commenting on the frame rate when you were playing it, yeah.
But even like the intro where you insert your quarters, like that runs at a slightly higher frame rate, but it's not like to the point where it's detrimental to the game at all. It looks good. It looks like it's supposed to. Comparative to other Saturn and PlayStation games, especially Virtua Fighter, which they use the animations from, that game's very polygonal from like the actual graphics standpoint. And this game's like, yeah, you see the polygons, but they're not as, Final Fantasy VII and Virtual Fighter where you can count the polygons. So they did a great job covering those up.
I think you add into the equation that this game was almost a tack on. It wasn't birthed with love. It was birthed with, we have all these boards, we have this license, help.
Right.
I think you throw the amount of characters on screen and it looks better than Virtua Fighter. It's pretty impressive graphically, honestly. I was pretty impressed with it. And I have experience with this game from the arcade and Saturn standpoint. It looks identical. There's certain effects in this game that are pretty impressive for the time. So there's a stage where you're fighting firemen, and there's a fire truck that's scrolling in the background. It's spraying a hose at you. It's primitive looking, but the fact they have 3D moving water while scrolling left and right while you're fighting, no frame rate slowing down. It's pretty impressive, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree.
There's nowhere in this game where it's choppy.
Where it's multiple fountains shooting up and moving. It doesn't drop frames, yeah.
And it did keep up. Like, I feel like the frame rate, and I don't know what it runs at. That's a question for another day. But the frame rate kept up enough in that scene where the water could shoot and the fire truck could move, and I could appropriately time my jump to get over that water without feeling like I was cheated. Like, oh, this game's broken. Like, I was so far away from the water and I still got hit midair or whatever. Like, it moved. It flowed enough for me to feel like I had enough control.
I feel like this game is honestly a true testament to the quality of AM1 and STI, which obviously I'm a little biased being a huge Sega fan, but they just put out quality stuff back then.
I want to give a shout out to the giant fish in the background too. That was awesome. Like, you're fighting the football guy, and there's this huge, I don't even know what type of fish it is, an arowana or something. Yeah, man.
Whoa.
What if we just dove
Phantom Precursor.
Yep.
I had to do that.
That's great.
Well, even that, let's touch on that stage for a moment, because while you're fighting the boss, who's larger animation, and there's a lot of breakable environments at that part. There's barrels you can break apart and use as weapons. There's a scrolling 3D rendered background of a fish, and the frame rate doesn't slow down on that either. And it's very fluid. No. It's impressive. And for a game that was basically put together, well, we have this and we have this, there's little things all throughout. So there's a scene where you break into like a bathroom and you're going to fight guys, and one of the guys in the background is urinating in a stall, and like, he sees his buddies getting beat up and turns around, and that's how he comes into the fight. There's just little details that make this game kind of special. There's another one where you're transitioning to a screen and people are shooting at cops in the background. They're shooting at police cars with guns, and then they see you walk in, they all turn on you. It's very, there's things of uniqueness and love put into this game that was birthed out of throw it together. I think it stands out. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel like Sega has always brought, how do I say it? Between the Genesis and the Dreamcast and the Saturn, I feel like Sega has always been up with the modern times, but they're always one step behind. So, like, how is the Sega Genesis supposed to compete with the Super Nintendo? Because the Super Nintendo managed to beat them in the race, but, like, the Genesis outperforms it. And it just never caught up. So I feel like this Saturn is kind of the same, where, like, hardware-wise, there was so much there to offer, but they just couldn't catch up to the hype train on the PlayStation 1. And that I wish they would have lasted longer. Wish we would have. I don't know what would we get if we got a Sega modern day console?
I could do a whole 4-hour episode based on that for sure.
I don't think Sega has the monetary value to stand up to somebody like Microsoft now, but like take away the cost, like what could they come up with? And I wish I could see that to a fruition.
Sega's always had a characteristic trait where you can just tell it's Sega with its attitude, its feel, and I would love to see what that would translate into like modern gaming.
Yeah.
Obviously they still make some things, but as far as like a console, they always felt very, it's weird because they're talking about Sega here, but they felt focused in a way where...
And it's so weird because a lot of the like exclusive Sega titles that people talk about were like ahead of their time at the time, but way behind the hype train. So these head of a time titles like never got the light of day, like Power Stone and Jet Grind and I don't know, something else, but
name it.
There's just so many titles that I feel like came out on the Genesis or the especially the Dreamcast, but like they were, people remember them fondly, but it's those people that the one person that bought a Dreamcast.
It's weird because there's times where they're like visionaries and they're like ahead of the times, but they never got with the times, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it boils down to cohesion. You look at Sony, you look at Nintendo, they're well-oiled machines. America, Japan, they're all on the same page. Fundamental thing with that, Nintendo's well-oiled, super organized. Sony, same way. Japan and America, same page. Sega gonna Sega, and they're
not really though. Like if you think about it, like Sega has what's the word? Like they've been established longer than Sony was.
Sure.
Like Nintendo obviously was like, I mean Atari was.
As far as
Atari was, the most established, and then Nintendo came along and they've already got a couple consoles to like get everything together. And then Sega, by now, should have, by their third console, have had it together enough to really, like, push it. And then just Sony comes out of nowhere. And I don't really know how that happened because that was their first time, like, in the market, I suppose, as a big-time competitor. And people thought they weren't going to survive, just like they thought how Microsoft wasn't going to survive with their Xbox. But Sega and Nintendo should have had the upper hand.
Should have. The unfortunate thing is that Sega of America and Sega Japan were competing against themselves in a sense too, and it really killed them. I mean
almost. I think kind of what Brian said, like they didn't get with the times, like they're still stuck in arcade times.
Yep.
So and they were exceptional at it.
Yes, but it killed their home market.
Yes.
Where Nintendo focused solely on, we're not doing arcades anymore, we're doing home market.
Right.
And even Sony, like that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Sony succeeded because they had blind rage to fuel making their console, and they put so much love into their console, birthed from hate against Nintendo.
Yeah.
Getting them. It's
I mean,
it's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
Like, what a story. They should make an RPG about like the creation of PlayStation. Like, on to the final topic and the grand focus of the episode, the price and collectability aspect. So this game's kind of interesting price-wise. It's a little all over the place, and I think some of that has to do with Saturn games just being fairly uncommon in the wild, this being a fairly memorable, desired title. Okay, so we go by sold listings. We have a very varied price range. Current listings of available on eBay, the cheapest complete one you can buy right now is $210. Damn.
That's asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Just asking, so keep that in mind, please. There's also ones available international. I'm on international. Let me turn that off. 140. Okay. Cheapest one you can currently buy right now, listed on eBay at the time of this recording, is about $140. There's, like I said, there's sold listings of
complete. That's cheaper than my app says.
Yeah.
Is it going down?
It's just all over the place. 2 weeks ago, there was listings for $180, $200 sold.
Interesting.
It's very varied. It's complex to kind of give it a tribute value. I'd say an overall estimation complete in a box, the average price would be about $130 to $140 for this game. Now, recent highs with our current market being as wild as it is, there's highs around $200, which is excessive.
I would say, all things considered, for a complete copy, you probably would expect at this point to go anywhere from $140 to $180, depending on condition.
Correct.
If
Registration
you have
card.
An immaculate manual with a registration card and not busted up art inside of the back of the case, you could probably ask for more, because there are people in the market who will pay that extra premium for exceptionally well-conditioned games. So I would say like 180 is probably a good high end. I think anything higher than that might be asking way too much.
Yeah, like whoever bought the disc for $100, you're making poor life decisions.
I mean, maybe they just really want to play the game.
Sail the seas then.
Well, maybe they don't care about the case. If you want to be a loose collector, you can be a loose collector.
No judgment.
That's $40 they could have bought on another loose disc. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways.
So sales figures are pretty hard to find for Saturn anyways, so I was unable to locate sales figures this game, but judging from availability aspect online, this game's not a ghost. It's a fairly common game. You gotta keep in mind Sega made this game, so there's probably a decent amount out there as far as Saturn games are concerned.
Yeah, because we were looking it up a little bit. Saturn was in direct competition with PlayStation 1 and 64. So PS1 came out in 94, Saturn came out in 95, and then the 64 came out in 96. Based on the lifespans, PlayStation 1 sold 104 million units. Runner-up was 64, which is 32 million units across. So the 64 and the PlayStation 1 had the same lifespan, so about 6 years apiece, because the PlayStation 2 came out in 2000. Unfortunately, the Saturn only had a 3-year lifespan. So within those 3 years, it sold about 10 million units. Even if you cut PlayStation 1 and N64 in half, that's still 50 million units for PlayStation 1 and 15 million units for 64. So I suppose, like, it's a game, like, even if the game did exceptionally well, like, you're still exclusively putting it on a console that is not going out to a lot of people.
It's a little fish in a
small pond.
So for Saturn games, like, it seems like to me it did not have a low print run in comparison to the console. Because I mean, like, we looked, and right now on eBay, there's 20 different copies up that you could buy, so it's not hard to acquire, like Nate was saying. But in the lifespan, in total, it probably is a low print number compared to, I don't know, something super popular on a PlayStation 1.
Sure.
If you're looking for a low print Sega Saturn specifically, I don't think that falls into that category of a low print Sega Saturn game.
I don't think it's low print for sure. I think this is definitely one of the desired Sega Saturn games, though. People have fond memories of this game.
It reviewed exceptionally well.
Yes.
Like we said earlier, other than it being short, it reviewed very, very well. So,
Brian, share some of your thoughts of the collectability aspect of this game.
Yeah, it's an exclusive, so that's good going for it. I think you touched upon it that you don't really see Saturn stuff out in the wild. It's an interesting game. I think it's a fun game. I have a blast with it. How much did you pay for yours, Nate?
I paid $80 for mine a couple of years ago.
I was actually trying to look up MSRP of Saturn games when they originally came out, and I believe it was $59.99.
$60, yeah.
Which, I mean, would be high at the time. And you have to also consider, like, $60 for a Sega Saturn game when PlayStation out here pumping stuff out for like $30-$40.
Right.
So that is a hard sell too.
It's interesting, though, because the counter argument's like, you go to the arcade and how much you're going to spend on this game.
This is a fair point.
So,
how many quarters do you have?
Right. It's a very different market than it is now to compare it like that. However, I mean, $80 for this game, I would pull that trigger all day. It is kind of a weird oddball thing that would personally fit my collection. It is an exclusive. I do have a soft spot for the Saturn. You don't have to worry about, like, saving it with a battery, so that's pretty cool. You can just sit there, dust it off, play it with a buddy, kill 20 minutes of your life before you move on to something else. Like I said, it's a lot of fun. I think it's more fun than a couple of the other games we've covered. So I don't think this is emphatically as much as a yes or a no for me as it usually is, like, pretty cut and dry for me. But yeah, for me, at the current asking price for this, $100, I start scratching my head a little bit. The $80 you spend on it, I would pull that trigger every time, man. Like, it's a fun game. Like you said, not a lot of variety. It's fast, but it does its job where it's like you can either go buy the arcade version or you can buy this. Now, the PS2 version, what does that usually run for?
It is not cheap. If Sega released...
Did you mention it even having a PS2 version?
I don't think so.
Go ahead and mention it. Thank you, Brian, for the roll-in.
Part of the huge topical points of collectability for this game is Die Hard Arcade is only on the Sega Saturn in the arcade, but we touch on Dynamite Deca, just technically by title a different game. There is Sega Ages, which Sega put out large collection, Japan exclusive only, on PS2 of classic titles. This game is on PS2 in Japan. Obviously, it's not Die Hard Arcade.
So is the because they're the Sega Ages came out in like volumes? They're
Yes.
compilations, right?
They're complicated because they were released in bunches, but they're individual disc.
How
So
do they
Die Hard's on
originally?
a disc, right? Well, not
Dynamite
whatever it is.
So
Deca.
the only thing on that Sega Ages volume disc is Die Hard,
Pretty confident it's just
Or
Dynamite Deca, yeah.
Dynamite Deca, or whatever it is.
Sega Ages Dynamite Deca, yeah. I just looked it up, and
Did they come out with their own individual cases?
Yep. Here, I'll pull one up for you.
But they're called. So is it called like
Sega Ages 2500 Dynamite Deca.
Okay, so yeah,
Sega Ages?
That's like the volume.
this is like before we could just download individual
Oh, so it's almost like a
titles.
series.
Yes.
I always thought it was a volume on one thing, like a compilation.
That would
Yeah.
make more sense, but Sega got to Sega, right?
Okay.
So this game is available on PS2 in Japan under the Sega Ages banner. It's not cheap. It's pretty desired, but
What's it run for usually?
current asking price is eBay around 150 to 160 a copy.
So I mean, you're
Oh, that's the like Fantasy Star with the upgraded
exact same thing.
graphics.
Exact same thing.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So this is arguably the best version to play is on PS2. If you don't care about having the Die Hard license, it has a ton more features on it. It's got tons of Sega Easter eggs, so you can play the whole game as Yuki from Virtua Fighter. There's stage options that actually extend the gameplay quite a bit.
Or PS2 is region locked.
I think so.
I
Now here's the real question though: if you have a backwards comp PS3 and that game's compatible, can you play the Japanese version?
Because you don't really need to understand what's been said.
Right.
correct.
And I know people
Guess
who
we should
do
look that up
buy
real
those
quick.
games specifically to play them. And I don't know if it's
Because
a
going to
region.
the point of is it worth it if you can buy the
I'm pretty sure
Japanese
PlayStation
version.
3 is region free because I own Japanese games I could play on it.
right? So if it's comparably the same price for
PS2 is region locked.
So PS3 is not.
Correct. Well, PS3 is region locked too.
So what if you have a
No,
backwards comp
I don't think
PS3 is what I'm saying.
Right.
Because honestly, if that's compatible, yeah, you're spending roughly the same
Okay,
price.
PS3 except for Persona 4 and Way of the Samurai 3 are region free.
Way of the Samurai and
Third one. And
Persona 4.
Everything else is region free. Those
So
games
the
are
unit is region
Yes.
free. Okay. So you could, in theory, take that game into a backwards compatible PS3 and
Yep.
still play it fine.
That's what I'm saying.
Uh-oh.
So if you say
Oh.
asking the question, is it worth it? You're spending roughly the same amount for a better version of the game.
Yeah,
How much did you say the Sega Ages one was again?
150 to 160.
150. Okay.
So roughly the same price for a complete copy, roughly.
Plus, like, I didn't even touch on everything. There's different features. The graphics are completely redone. There's a lot of love and care put into the Sega Ages games. They're very regarded in Japan as quality. And you can make the argument this is certainly the best way to play this game. Now, you don't have your Die Hard license, but
At the end of the day, you barely have it anyway.
let's not pretend like the Die Hard license is the carrying point in the North American version.
So it's interesting. Knowing that, it kind of changes my answer. I mean, not 100%, but it solidifies that, I guess, to where unless you're a complete Sega collector and you want every exclusive for all the consoles or whatever, there's better ways to play it for exactly the same amount unless you don't have a backwards compatible PS3 or you don't have a PCB emulator for
Those
an
are very
arcade.
pricey now, too. The backwards
Right.
comp PS3s are
And
expensive.
that's the thing is the PlayStation 2 is region locked. So how difficult is it to get a region like a Japanese PS2?
It's a hugely successful console. It's got to be on the power input and stuff. Would
But
be
it's also PlayStation. Like how expensive are those here now?
But they're like $130.
They're dumb.
yeah, that's
And
true.
but then again, so you have to weigh like how much would it cost me to buy a PlayStation 3 backwards compatible if I want to see it in the best way because I can play it in HD. Okay.
Right.
Tack that price on with a Sega Ages 150. There's that price. And then if you don't want to do that, how much would it cost me to get a PlayStation 2 Japan region, play it that way, not in HD? Or am I still going cheaper by buying a Sega Saturn and getting it on Saturn?
Right. And it's not like Saturns are super cheap anymore either. So it's kind of a loaded question.
It's a very interesting one. It's kind of, as I did research, like I'm really excited to talk about this one because really the only flaw with the PS2 version, for some reason that fountain scene, there's extreme slowdown where it's almost unplayable, but that's the only scene. Other than that, it's fantastic.
For this market, that version is probably not the best to go. So you don't understand how the menus go. Getting accessibility for a PlayStation 3 backwards compatible unit or a Japan import PS2 is not accessible. I mean, to be honest, like, if anybody is collecting for Sega Saturn, you already know what you're getting into.
Exactly.
That's a very fair point.
So there would be no reason to weigh, like, I really want to play this game. Which one? You already own a Sega Saturn if you're buying this game, or if you're even thinking about this game.
Right.
I would be shocked to see someone say, I own this and I don't own a Saturn, and I have no intention of playing it. Oh, there are those people out there, but whatever. I have my opinions about that. But all things considered, for a North American audience, like, this is probably the best way to get it.
Yeah.
I'll say this too, compared to other exclusive Saturn titles, this is on the cheaper spectrum.
Yeah, and I did want to touch on that. Like, if you think about it being probably a higher print Sega Saturn game, it's still a Sega Saturn game.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
There's not a lot of collectors out there going for Sega Saturn games unless you're set collectors, or you are console-specific collectors, or you are brand-specific collectors, or you are genre-specific collectors. You know, like, some average person who just gets into collecting is probably not going to pick Die Hard Arcade unless you have a very specific reason to buy it. So, I don't know if we're into the is it worth it part yet.
Just a lot to weigh. Yeah.
But, like, the way I think about it is, like, this is not a game I am going to buy. I have no intention of... I own a Saturn, don't get me wrong, but, like, I don't have a Saturn for beat-em-ups. I'm not a beat-em-up fan. But for this game being a Sega Saturn, it's hard to get them with the case is not broken, with the manual's not busted, with missing the back, so the disc gets scratched super, super, super easy, and those discs, like, if you resurface a CD disc too many times, you will wipe the data off. So you can't buy into Sega CD games or Sega Saturn games or PlayStation 1 games that are heavily, heavily scratched, because they'll be worthless anyways. So that considered as well, I think this game is easily worth $150. This is on my list of things to buy. Like, that seems like a reasonable price to me, all things considered. How hard it is to find Sega Saturn in its entirety at all. If I were to buy it, $150 doesn't really sound that unreasonable. Even though I'm not going to, if I put myself in those shoes, where if I want to beat 'em ups, if I like Die Hard, if I want sets, like, $150 is not, okay.
It's weird for me because, like, I really enjoy this game. I think it's fun, but knowing how short it is, that kind of wavers my opinion. I don't want to pay $100 for this. 80, like you paid every time, no questions asked. But man, it's just knowing that's short. There is some replayability, but
you're gonna have to, though. Who's got a Die Hard cabinet you can go throw a couple quarters in?
It's kind of surprising to hear that from you. So, like, this...
And to be fair, just full transparency, it's a game I want. I don't have one. I do want one, but it's like, man.
I mean, take the entire Sega Saturn library and that compared to the whole thing. Like, that's a pretty reasonable price. So for my final answer is, like, yeah, it's worth it. Like you were saying, I think it's a great point for, like, an exclusive Saturn game. This is pretty reasonable. It is a fun game. It is a good game. It is an exclusive. So there's a lot of things that are, like, going for it. As far as it holding value as, like, a, you know, collectible monetary purchase, I don't think it's necessarily the best option on Saturn, but it's a fun game for a reasonable price for an exclusive. So, I mean, I would say yes overall.
Yeah, this one's interesting. I don't think the Die Hard license, like, necessarily carries over to, like, any additional collectability aspect of this game. But if you look at this series, Dynamite Deku, there's actually a sequel on Dreamcast. So, like, Japan, this game has a following. Even the game Project X Zone, Bruno's in that game as a collectible fighter, which is super interesting. I didn't know that until I researched this. But so this game has a little more going for it than just this one Saturn game. I think it's interesting. There's several Die Hard games. I think this is generally regarded as the best Die Hard game. I think that's going to be most people's opinion. You do battle with the length of it. That's the biggest red flag of this game. I think everything else you have going for it, you guys have pretty much touched on all the points of, as far as it being on Saturn. It's actually an enjoyable game. It's not outrageously expensive. It's $150, $150. Let's be real, especially in the economy that we're in right now.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. And I have to weigh things a little bit differently compared to some of the games that we've been doing. Because, like, to be honest, I feel like I've been a little bit harsh on some of them. But $150 for a Sega Saturn game, knowing how little they sold, how little the lifespan was, how well it wasn't really received, like, that seems reasonable to me. if we're talking up in the $800-900 range, like we're gonna start asking some different questions here. But like $150 really isn't that unreasonable, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think you want to sprinkle on, if you're a Sega fan, this game has quite a bit of history with it. That you look in the development of it, where it being a first 3D beat 'em up, STI's last game.
I was going to say that it's got some historical significance to it as well.
It's a pretty neat little interesting title, and we all had fun playing it. So for me personally, my copy is pretty exquisite. It's got the registration card. It's very minty. I had no problem putting $80. This is a game I was hunting for when I actually actively found it out in the wild. So I would personally still spend $150 on this game pretty comfortably. I just purchased a much more expensive game that I would not want to play as much as this game, honestly. So,
I mean, I would argue if you have any interest in buying this game, wait till you find a better condition one, solely for the fact that you do not want to accidentally get a disc that's too far gone.
I would 100% back
I'd be very
that up.
careful with that.
This game, there's enough out there where you can be a little patient with this one, and the price has fluctuated. When I chose this episode, this was hovering consistently around $180. Now, the current market might kind of be dictating some of that. But this game does move around a little bit, so I would personally suggest you can be patient with this one, and you will find a good copy.
I mean, and disc rot is a thing, but like I don't even think that's going to affect the market anymore. I mean, you've got people who are buying games and don't even play them, and they don't care.
They want that shelf.
They want that full set. I am a believer in buying good condition items just because I don't want trash stuff in my collection. That's a personal preference. But I mean, I guess if you're buying this and have any intention of playing it, like you probably are going to want the best one you can find. Maybe you'll, be unlucky and it looks pristine and it's got some disc rot. Sorry. I don't think that's as prevalent as a problem as it's going to be in maybe 10 more years.
Agree, especially in our region.
I think that point of collecting has been brought up prematurely. So I wouldn't worry too much about it right now, but it is something to consider. But I mean, if you're buying this game just to complete the set and you don't want to play it, like, I don't know, go out there and save somebody else the trouble and buy the most scratched up disc you can find, because you're just going to put it in the case on your shelf and you're going to look at it. So, buy the scratchy up ones and let us get the ones we can play.
Yeah, I think this game is a very easy game just to pull off the shelf. You got friends over, want to play some Saturn. Like, this is one of those games, it's a go-to in that regard. So I guess we'll pose the ultimate question to everyone around the table. Barry, is it worth it?
Die Hard Arcade on Sega Saturn for $150 complete in box. I say yes.
It's funny because I've gone back and forth on this, but after hearing some good points from Barry about, it being a Saturn exclusive and being reasonable, I'll say yeah, it's worth it. It's a fun game.
I think for this one, whether you're looking for a good time, if you're just buying stuff to play, or you're collecting, I think this is an absolutely worth it title. I think it's got a legacy behind it. It's got history behind it. Saturn. It's not horribly expensive. I think it has room to grow. I think Saturn's always going to have kind of room to grow. I think if you're looking for an investment, this game's worth it. I'd say buy it, but you can be patient. That's the beauty of this one, too. It's not so uncommon where you have to buy it if you see it and you're going to kick yourself for missing it.
I mean, we ain't going to have a Die Hard resurgence anytime soon.
No, we aren't. I think the
not.
last two films took care of that for everybody.
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask, why do you see my only point of hesitancy as far as a collectability or holding on to it monetarily? What's your argument for that?
What do you mean?
Well, you just said you think it would be a good investment. Why do you think it would be a good investment?
I think Saturn's still got room to grow. I think it's underappreciated, and people are going to go back and kind of experience Saturn and have a good time with it.
I wouldn't argue a good investment. I don't think it's a risky investment.
That's probably a better way to put it.
Way to word it.
Like this game, I don't see a game as like, and I hate talking about this point, but
Same.
Whatever. I mean, if you're going to buy it for $150, don't expect it to jump up to $300 in 3 months, but I wouldn't expect this game to tank. It's probably a pretty solid buy.
A more eloquent way of what I was trying to express. Yeah, I don't see this game coming out to bite you in the ass because you spent $150 on it.
There's other games that are more volatile that I would probably be a little bit more careful about, but this game with its history, I mean, I guess in the long run you're going to quote unquote gain money on it with inflation if you look at numbers like that, but I don't think this is a game that really is going to look at it like bonds. You know what I mean? Like bonds are that's the way, like if you're investing money into bonds, they don't make too much money as a gain. They don't really lose anything. They're a really safe bet. So Die Hard Arcade is a bond. You're not going to gain big bucks on it, but I don't think you're going to lose out either.
It's all reliable, though.
Yeah, all reliable.
The type of collectors that most of us at the table are, it's a fun game, and that's what matters. I
would say all. I've never bought anything just to be like, I can make money on this.
No, I didn't mean it like that. We can go ahead and cut that if it came across like that.
No, and I don't think it did. I think that we primarily look at, is it fun, as the biggest determining on if we're going to spend that much money.
We're video game players.
Yeah. At the same time, I am also not going to overspend if I don't have to.
Yes.
So if I see something that's been spiking and spiking and spiking in the last 3 weeks, like, I'm not going to buy it at that price and FOMO. I'll probably be patient and wait, and maybe it'll bite me in the butt later. I don't know.
I mean, there's times where it's like, I know this game's expensive and this is a good deal on it, and it's still a hefty price. Like Jack Bros is a good example. But yeah, I've never bought something just hoping that it turns into an investment.
I think at the end of the day, we're all players here.
Yeah.
We all have different habits with collecting. I know Brian is more of wanting everything, and I'm somewhere in the middle, and then Barry's like, I'm only going to play it. But I think at the end of the day, we're here to play the damn games, and I think it's a very fun game to play at the end of the day.
I mean, speaking on Saturn, like, I had the chance to buy an Albert Odyssey, and I didn't, and the next time it came up, it was $400, and, like, that's what the internet price was for it, and I said, I don't care. Like, it was a great condition. This is a game I've always wanted. This is the only second one I've seen in person. I was like, give me it right now, and since then, it's probably $320 now. I spent $400 on a game, maybe like a year ago? Year and a half ago? Something like that?
If even, it might have been this year.
No, I did not buy that this year. I don't think.
It was before I was married. You're right.
So it was last year.
Late last year.
About a year and a half ago. Anyways, but like, I have an $80 loss on it, but like, I didn't care. Like, at the time, so you have to weigh if a loss is going to be worth it to you or not. And like, no, that's one of my big titles I wanted for my collection. I did not care if it was at internet price at the time. I didn't care if it was going to go up. I didn't care if it was going to go down. It was in my face, and I said, give it to me. So
I think the ultimate question is if you're comfortable paying that for it. I have gotten more than my $80 worth of fun out of this game. Even if it was $150, I would pay $150 for this game. I want to play this game. I want to own this game. I have good memories and a good time playing this game.
I think this is our...
I think this is where I put the open challenge for the versus mode out on Sega Netlink.
Second unanimous, yes?
Yeah.
If I'm tracking mentally.
I was actually surprised because I was concerned...
Y'all probably thought I was going to say no.
I did, honestly.
Yeah, because I usually do.
Well, no. I wasn't going to go that far. I was going to say you're not really a fan of beat-em-ups, and it's short. The game's extremely short.
That's the thing, and I've been thinking about that. This is obviously not into it, but like, I've been thinking about that a lot recently, like how a lot of these games that you guys are going to bring up, I will never buy. So is that going to be my answer every single time I come on here and say no, 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 no? Ooh, RPG time, yes. Like,
I always try to think of it from like everybody else's perspective.
In like a general perspective.
Yep.
So,
yeah, and
that's why I said to me no, but
well, I think it's interesting. We can leave this on here. Like, I had no going into this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it's so damn short.
I was leaning towards no until she brought up some good points.
Yeah, I think Barry brought some like really eloquently spoken points about the Saturn and kind of like where we're at in it, and the history had me itching. Like, yeah, it's worth it because I can see it, especially Sega enthusiasts. If Sega like eventually does die out completely, this is gonna be one of those games people will kind of go back for. I feel like, but
I don't know. To me, sometimes I gotta think like, yeah, it was a short time, but you ever spend $150 on something that was shorter? There's probably people out there who easily spend $150 on like a big old meal and like that'd be it and it'd be gone forever, and that's just what they enjoy, which is fine. So
yeah,
you
only get to look at it one more time and then you're done with it.
I am fully okay with a game being short as long as it's not broken. I think there's a big difference where if I cannot play this game feasibly because it's so broken, like, it doesn't matter if it's 50 hours or like 20 minutes. So it felt cohesive in terms of how long it was.
It's a very quality title, but I was pleasantly surprised at everyone's like response to it. So I thought it was a very interesting topical one for a short game with not a lot of meat on the bone. I feel like there's some good discussion around this one.
Plus, this is the highest quality deep sea game that you can play. Like, this is a twofer.
We didn't even talk about that. That's true.
Yeah, this is a twofer, man.
This is a compilation.
I don't know about compilation.
One game on here.
I'm just saying the amount of value you get was the only way to play the best possible way.
This is a 2-in-1.
Yeah.
Which did you find out which one was on the PS2 game?
Yeah.
Was it Deep Space?
Super Scope on the PS2 one.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Super Scope.
Yeah, it's another submarine game, but it was Super Scope. I actually played at Galloping Ghost. I think you might have been over when I was playing it. So there's no actual animation. It's even older than that. It was modeled plastic that had lights, and you looked through a telescopic, is that what it's called? Like the periscope? You looked
Periscope,
through a
yeah.
periscope, and you'd pull the trigger, and a little light would flash as like you're tracking your target, and you would knock over almost like a shooting gallery with electronics instead of like an actual pellet. It would
So there's
shoot
no
out.
Video.
Correct.
Interesting.
So they emulated that into this game.
So they made. So it's the first. I don't know if it's the first one.
The first.
The first virtual, non-virtual converted sub game of the time. That's hilarious.
Wow.
It's like, holy shit! Did you guys know that Solitaire didn't originate as a video game? It was
Actual physical
it was
card.
actual physical cards made out of paper with printed colors on it that you played on a surface.
They see as real kings and jacks.
And you had to use your hands to move them.
That's crazy. I think all in all, it's pleasantly surprised that the Collecti-Bros say this is a good one. Go ahead and make this one worth it. Brian, why don't you go ahead and tell us what we got next on the agenda?
For the next episode, I'm actually pretty excited to talk about this. I think it can be a very negative subject, but we want to be positive with it. The title of the episode's Coping in a Collector's Market. The way the market is, it can be dark, it can be dreary, but there's ways around it, guys. Power of positivity, right? We're going to give you guys some tips, some of our own personal opinions and outlook on that. Should be a fun one. It really should.
We sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. If you enjoyed this, you can find us on social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the TikTok. We're at Collecti-Bros Pod. Look forward to community engagement. Brian wants to know if anyone can take them versus Netlink on the Saturn for Die Hard.
Let's do it up. It's like a Netlink, baby.
They can't even do that.
No, it's
That's
shut down.
disappointing. That's sad.
I wish they could.
Me too. Evo's calling my name.
No, but if you guys have any opinions, thoughts about Die Hard, memories playing Die Hard Arcade even, we'd love to hear from everybody. So thank you so much sincerely from the bottom of each and every one of us' hearts. We'll catch you next time. Marry, fuck, kill, cryptids. Brian, go.
Oh, man. Well, we'll marry the Mothman. He's all reliable. He's kind of like the go-to. One of the ones that everyone thinks about. It's fuzzy, so it'll keep you warm at night. He's a good one to marry and just snuggle up with, you know. As far as...
Is he fuzzy? Because I thought he was a bird.
He's a moth.
Moth.
He's a bird,
No,
moth,
I think
UFO.
people-
Mothman is a moth.
I'm going to assume him's fuzzy.
Some people say he's a bird man. He's like a bird.
true.
He's got down feathers, even better.
It's true.
Okay,
Either way, it's going to keep me
alright,
warm at
either
night
way.
when we snuggle
Okay.
and watch Netflix together.
I don't really know the origination of the moth part, but
It's the eyes.
It's the eyes.
yeah, that makes sense.
Plus, yeah, imagine just gazing to those eyes. You can, you know,
Hypnotic.
yeah,
You can fall in love with someone with those kind of eyes.
it's true. As far as the banging goes down, introduced this one recently. The Ningen, am I pronouncing that correctly?
I don't know.
I don't know.Ningen. Look him up.
Ningen.
I don't know how to describe this other than it's like a tadpole without a tail with long legs that lives in the snow.
It's supposed to be like a humanoid whale.
Yeah. I love
Like-
beluga whales.
A beluga,
not like
a
this.
beluga whale
Yeah.
arms, or there's some where it looks like a whale head tadpole with people legs.
I mean, I love whales. I do. I've swam with them. I've never thought about banging them, but like this
of
one's
course,
not a
you picked the
whale.
humanoid whale.
Yeah, it's not a whale. It's a humanoid. So like
He's a humanoid whale.
that's a coin toss. You know?
Humanoid.
Flip.
That's one of those justification, like thin line
Hey,
justifications.
I'm just saying, if he feels like a beluga whale, it'll be fun. They feel like hard-boiled eggs. They're giant.
On the outside, right, Brian?
I don't know.
Stop it.
It's the dumbest shit we've ever done. This is like so stupid.
No, this one still makes more
consoles,
sense
the
than the
cryptids,
consoles, but okay.
Why are we this way?
And then for kill, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of like primates, apes, monkeys. They terrify me. I don't like them. So like, there's a lot of cryptoids that are ape-like. So to narrow it down, this skunk ape, he probably stinks. Like, what's he bring to the table anyway? He's not a Bigfoot. Like, he just stinks. It's a dumb cryptoid. Get out of here.
Oh my
How
god.
about you, Nate?
All right.
Judge me for my beluga whales.
Okay. So I'm marrying the Flatwoods monster. It's striking. It's unique. One of a kind. Someone you could get lost in the woods with and spend the rest of your life with. Now, I'm spending a night with Chupacabra, which translates to goat sucker. Tell me a
Greatest
night
of
with
all
this
time.
goat sucker doesn't sound like someone you want to spend the night with.
He's the greatest of all time.
Yeah. And then as far as kill, I picked the Thunderbird. I'm just wondering if so these were all as common as pigeons. We'd be screwed because it's almost like Rodan where it's huge and it flies. It's killing everyone. So
You're trying to cull them then.
I mean, yeah,
This is Thunderbird genocide.
I'm gonna kill a Thunderbird. That's if it's real, it's terrifying and it would just be so destructive. I would have to serve humanity. I want that night with the goat sucker. So I'm killing the Thunderbird.
How about you, Barry?
All right.
So
Shit's
dumb.
so dumb.
It's so dumb.
All right. I'm going to marry Mothman, going with Brian.
Yeah.
What's not to like?
The Mothman's lovely.
I will save all the cryptoids.
Creature of
It's
the
my
night.
favorite.
He's
Yeah.
quiet. Fly. He's big. He can wrap you up, fly you around. What I'm trying to say is he's big enough to pick me up and fly me on adventures
Yep.
in the middle of the night. That's what I was trying to say.
Somebody you could honestly spend the rest of your life with.
Traversal versatility. All right. We're going to fuck Owlman.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Because apparently he's a man that looks like an owl, but he has pincer hands.
Ooh.
I don't know.
So you're saying he's the Wii of cryptids?
Seemed it?
It's like crab claws and an
I
owl
think
body.
so. I think so. From what I understand. I don't know. It sounded wild. And then I'm killing the Mongolian deathworm.
Ooh.
We're talking Dune style worm.
Apparently it is described as a 2-foot worm that lives in the desert. But I think it looks more like a centipede. Nobody knows if it actually exists, but the thing is so deadly that one touch causes instant death.
Yikes.
So the fact that it possibly looks like a bug means it needs to die.
It's a fair assessment.
So that's my choice.
Very fair.